أكبر الله أكبر.
On January 7, 2015, two madmen organised a random attack on the offices of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. They opened fire, killing 5 of the magazine's cartoonists, plus 7 others, including 2 police officers, whose personal religious beliefs are of such irrelevance I'm not even sure why I bring it up. Coincidentally, this is not the first time this little magazine has been on the receiving end of an organised random attack. In 2012, after releasing a special edition entitled Sharia Hebdo, in which the magazine was guest edited by the Prophet Muhammad, their website was hacked and their offices firebombed. In 2007, the Grand Mosque, the Muslim World League, and the Union of French Islamic Organisations tried to silence the magazine in court with an allegation that one of their editions included racist cartoons, and was thus illegal under French law. The judge, however, dropped the case and ruled that Charlie Hebdo had not broken French law, stating that it wasn't racist, it just attacked religious fundamentalists. And if you haven't read that issue, I won't ruin it by telling you which religion's fundamentalists. But with all of this randomly organised madness going on, it's no wonder that our Western media would eventually stand up and raise the question:
who would carry out such a crime and why?
That's right, why indeed? How else to prevent this kind of atrocity from ever happening again if not by addressing the root cause? Even if no immediate conclusion is obvious, at least we can determine and try to understand the motivation behind these attacks. So, what motivated these attacks? We simply do not know. Luckily, some video footage emerged, which may offer a hint. Yeah, right. Obviously, ideologies and personal beliefs have nothing to do with how people behave or think. So the current working theory is that it probably has something to do with terrorism, and absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with religion, especially Islam.
Those who carried out these attacks, the terrorists, the madmen, these fanatics have nothing to do with the Muslim religion.
Which is why all of the headlines accurately, yet vaguely, describe this event as either an attack or a terror attack, but not a religious attack, and certainly not a Muslim or Islamic attack, because again, their religious beliefs are completely harmless and have absolutely nothing to do with how people behave. Unless, of course, you happen to be a dead Muslim policeman.
He is Muslim.
Or better yet, a Muslim hero.
He is a Muslim from Mali. He saved 15 people.
In which case, your personal beliefs are absolutely worth mentioning in all of the headlines. But anyway, that's the Charlie Hebdo narrative, brought to you by Western media. Acts of terror committed by random terrorists, who were in no way motivated by religion, especially Islam. And astonishingly, in a free and democratic society, if you dare question this narrative, or imply that such violence can in any way be derived from the teachings of Islam, from the religion of peace, you will be ostracised, and often denounced as an Islamophobic, bigoted racist.
A phobia is an irrational fear, okay? It's quite rational to fear female genital mutilation of 2,000 British Muslim girls every year, terrorism like happened to Lee Rigby. Like 2 days ago, 6 Muslims who were sentenced to 19, 20 years each because they were planning to blow up the English Defence League due to the blasphemy law within the Quran. Okay, there's a link to all these things, the same with the Muslim grooming gangs. As a common denominator, you have to look for what the issue is, what links them all. They're all Muslim.
I'm a Muslim and I'm horrified to see Islamophobia in particular, as well as other kinds of racism. Do the panel think it would be a good idea to take Tommy Robinson and Anjum Chowdhury and put them on some kind of island and bomb it with anthrax?
OK, that's quite strongly put, but I think I get the idea.
We have been sold this meme of Islamophobia, where every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
And that is it's intellectually ridiculous.
Where are you running away from?
Because I know what you like, bruv. You have about 100 you in a minute. You f***ing little chief.
What has happened to me through having this opinion and speaking out the way I do, it's destroyed my life, it's destroyed my wife's life, it's destroyed my mother's life. I live with constant death threats. I've got some of them here if you want to read when we talk about a two-tier policing system. I have to wear a bulletproof vest. I've got people wanting to murder me and massacre me.
Well, then stop being a racist and a bigot.
Racist? Can you please explain one thing I've ever said?
I am a British citizen. I was born in this country, and I do not spout off rubbish like you do. Okay?
No, what am I saying that's rubbish?
I haven't got death threats. Do you know why? It's because I'm a nice person.
Please explain.
If
you talk against Islam, you'll have death threats.
Because it's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so nuts.
It's like saying those stateless, shifty Jew.
You're not listening.
It's just drawing a picture of Muhammad. It's not. The images that they're actually drawing of Muslims and the Prophet himself are racist.
When he talks about Charlie Hebdo published whatever they wanted, that's rubbish. They were overtly racist towards Muslims. They were always lampooning Arabs and being overtly racist in most of their publications.
Being a Muslim requires a certain religion as opposed to a certain look, right? How do you determine someone's Muslim? Anyway.
What you're doing is, rather than listening to the point, you just want to shout racist, which is what's happening in this country for 15, 20 years.
Because you are.
No, what have I said? What have I said that's racist?
Because you are.
Tommy,
you're so weak.
You are racist.
You've got nothing to back up, darling.
That, do you?
Tommy, let Carla speak.
You're getting
what
really
have I said that's racist?
You are a racist.
What have I said that's
bigot.
racist?
You're a racist.
What have I said?
Carla?
I get this idea. We have a Muslim and we have race. Muslim is a faith system, and therefore it's not a race. So we cannot use the word racism when we're talking about a religion, because it is a choice. Yeah. Your race is not a choice, and anything that you can convert to is not a race. So therefore we're looking at two different issues, and we're conflating two different ideas together to try and make a point that doesn't make sense.
Describing Islam as a race is simply a tactic used to stifle the real conversation, which not only belittles the proper use of the term, but shamefully distorts the position of anyone opposing Islam and makes their religion immune to criticism. But the reason it's wrong to criticise, stereotype, or actively discriminate against groups of people for reasons of race, or even gender, disability, and sexual orientation is because we accept the fact that a person's moral conduct has absolutely nothing to do with the characteristics they happen to be born with and cannot change. In stark contrast, however, religious belief is synonymous with moral guidance, and whether it's a religious book or a political manifesto, we have to be free to question their supposed moral value without fear of being condemned for doing so.
Considering that atheism cannot possibly have any sense of absolute morality, would it not then be an irrational leap of faith for an atheist to decide between right and wrong?
Absolute morality, the absolute morality that a religious person might profess would include what? Stoning people for adultery? Death for apostasy, punishment for breaking the Sabbath. I don't think I want an absolute morality. I think I want a morality that is thought out, reasoned, argued, discussed.
Today, our politically correct media and politicians would have us believe that these attacks in Paris were a one-off event, perpetrated by lunatics who were lying when they said they did it in the name of Islam, as if all the problems of the world will magically disappear if we simply use euphemistic language or flat-out dishonest terminology.
Terrorism is wrong, killing people is bad, but that has to mean all types of terrorism. Who gets to define what terrorism means?
You know, this is a chronic problem. I stopped calling these people Muslim terrorists. They're about as Muslim as I am. I mean, they have no respect for anybody else's life. That's not what the Quran says. And you know, Europe has an enormous radical problem, and an enormous. I think ISIS is a cult, not an Islamic cult. I think it's a cult.
But there is such a thing as Islamic Muslim terrorists. And in what other circumstances would we believe the words of the media over the words of the actual criminals just moments after committing an attack. When it comes to groups like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Boko Haram, ISIS, and the governments of the many countries who live under Islamic law, our media continues to deny any correlation between their violent behaviour and a belief in Islam.
There's a long history of this White House being very, very reluctant to talk about terrorism, to call something terrorism. This was not one of the worst offenses that this administration has had. I mean, they did start out talking about extremism and an act of violence, but they pretty quickly called it terrorism because it was so obviously terrorism. What they haven't done is call it Islamic terrorism. But he didn't use the word Islam or Muslim once. He did make reference to an imam about 3 minutes in. But, you know, these acts were done by specific people with a specific ideology, and this White House is still incredibly gun-shy, no pun intended, about calling any attention to the fact that the people we're at war with aren't just sort of generic extremists off the shelf, but they're a specific ideology with a specific religious orientation.
Instead of ever looking at the religion these people believe in, our attention is being diverted to conversations of colonialism, economics, and geopolitics.
Fox News, as we know, is owned by Rupert Murdoch, and it's not like he's just a daft, lovely old man, like, you know, like a sort of a racist granddad who's think, oh, don't worry, he's a granddad, he's from a different time. Different if your granddad owns a multi-trillion-dollar media organisation and has investments in energy companies that will benefit from further military activity abroad, that requires the malignment and hatred of Muslims and Muslim nations and the dehumanisation of Muslims to continue. Murdoch is part owner of an Israeli-American company, Genie Energy. This company has been granted the rights to explore for oil on the Golan Heights, which is Israeli-occupied Syrian land. So there's always an economic angle. There's always an ideological angle.
Now, colonialism, economics and geopolitics are indeed ingredients which do help shape the environmental conditions, and we humans are basically products of our given environment. However, we cannot continue to ignore or downplay the effect religion has on behaviour. Nor should we pretend that all religions are equally harmful. The catchphrase that all religions are the same is yet another stifling tactic to prevent anyone from singling out and criticising Islam.
There is, I'm happy to say, a religion of peace in this world, but it's not Islam. Okay. To call Islam a religion of peace, as we hear ceaselessly reiterated, is completely delusional. Now, Jainism actually is a religion of peace. That the core principle of Jainism is nonviolence. Gandhi got his nonviolence from the Jains. They are paralyzed by their pacifism. Jain extremists they can't take their eyes off the ground when they walk lest they step on an ant. They filter every sip of water through cheesecloth lest they swallow and thereby kill a bug. I mean, needless to say, they're vegetarian. The crazier you get as a Jain, the less we have to worry about you. It is. Notice, the problem is not religious extremism, okay, because extremism is not a problem if your core beliefs are truly nonviolent. The problem isn't fundamentalism, which we often hear this said. These are euphemisms. I mean, the only problem with Islamic fundamentalism are the fundamentals of Islam.
Another stifling catchphrase we often hear is, "Not all Muslims are bad people," which is infuriating for two reasons. Firstly, the term bad is too loose of a term. For instance, I find it psychologically damaging to teach children that there is such a place as hell, or to actually believe in obvious fantasy, such as Muhammad flying to heaven on a big horse with wings.
And do you actually believe in your Muslim faith? Do you believe that Muhammad split the moon in two? Do you believe that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, for example? I pay you the compliment of assuming that you don't.
No, I do. I believe in miracles.
You believe that?
Yes.
You believe that Muhammad went to heaven on a winged horse?
Yes, I believe in God. I believe in miracles. I believe in revelation. I mean, the point here is that let's assume I'm wrong, Richard. I'm wrong.
Let's
assume I'm wrong. I'm wrong.
I find it bad to hold a belief that those who leave the faith should be punished.
What is the penalty for leaving the Muslim faith?
To be honest, I cannot back that point up.
Dr. Muqaddam, what is the penalty for apostasy?
If it's an Islamic country, then the Sharia is very clear. Apostasy is dealt with the death penalty.
Thank you, that's all I want to hear.
And I also find it bad to believe that homosexuals and adulterers should be punished. Whether you participate in the actual punishing or not, the belief itself I find bad. Gender inequality, genital mutilation, and the sexual oppression of women, all of these things I consider bad. And if you happen to identify as Muslim and condemn all of these things as I do, then perhaps I find it bad that you claim to endorse a religion while actively ignoring the particular teachings you happen to disagree with. So, in a certain context, I could honestly say I think all Muslims are bad. But of course, this brings me to the second reason this phrase is stifling, because people don't mean bad in this mild sense. When people say not all Muslims are bad, what they really mean is not all Muslims are terrorists. As if anyone with a brain needs to be told this. And the not all Muslims are terrorists sentiment is usually coupled with Muslim extremists are an insignificant, small fraction of the Muslim world. Well, let's just try and shed some light on this claim.
Please do.
We have
luggage sitting there packed
just
up.
imagine some concentric circles here. You have at the center, you have jihadists. These are people who wake up in the morning wanting to kill apostates, wanting to die trying. They believe in paradise. They believe in martyrdom. Outside of them, we have Islamists. These are people who are just as convinced of martyrdom and paradise and wanting to foist their religion on the rest of humanity, but they want to work within the system. They're not going to blow themselves up on a bus. They want to change governments. They want to use democracy against itself. Those two circles arguably are 20% of the Muslim world. Okay, this is not the fringe of the fringe.
What are you basing that research on?
A bunch of poll results that we can talk about. So to give you one point of contact, 78% of British Muslims think that the Danish cartoonist should have been prosecuted. 78%. So I'm being conservative when I roll this back to 20%. But outside of that circle, you have conservative Muslims who can honestly look at ISIS and say that does not represent us, that we're horrified by that, but they hold views about human rights and about women, about homosexuals that are deeply troubling. So these are not Islamists, they're not jihadists, but
those views are anathema to ours.
But they also keep women and homosexuals immiserated in these cultures, and we have to empower the true reformers in the Muslim world to change it. And lying about the link between doctrine and behavior is not going to do that.
The great
and behavior is not going to do that.
The great divide. The great divide.
Everyone in the room, how many of you are normal Muslims? You're not extremists, you're not radical, just normal Sunni Muslims. Please raise your hands.
It shouldn't be it should be anti-violence. You shouldn't go, what, so they were Muslim? No, the fucking religion isn't interesting to me.
How many of you agree that men and women should sit separate? Please raise your hands.
The fucking religion isn't interesting to me.
Next question. How many of you agree that the punishments described in the Quran and the Sunnah, whether it is death, whether it is stoning for adultery, whatever it is, if it is from Allah and His Messenger, that is the best punishment ever possible for humankind. And that is what we should apply in the world. Who agrees with that? Allahu Akbar. Are you all radical extremists? Subhanallah. So all of you are saying that you are common Muslims, you all go to the different masajid Norway, or are you like a specific sect, like the Islam net sect or anything like that? Are you like that? No. Are you like that? Please raise your hand if you're like this extreme Islam net sect or anything like that. No one. Allahu Akbar. How many of you just go to these normal masajids in Norway, the normal Sunni mosques? Please raise your hands. Allahu Akbar. So what's the politicians gonna say now? What's the media gonna say now?
The fucking religion isn't interesting to me.
There are undoubtedly many issues with the Islamic religion which non-believers in secular societies would find atrocious were they given an honest portrayal of Islam, and unfortunately I don't have the means to address all of these issues, but I would like to give you a breakdown of at least one: genital mutilation.
Handed a small baby for the first time, is it your first reaction to think, beautiful, almost perfect, now please hand me the sharp stone for its genitalia that I may do the work of the Lord?
An uncircumcised penis has 24,000 nerve endings, 20,000 of which are in the foreskin. The foreskin is like an eyelid, it's there to protect the head of the penis. A circumcised penis gets calloused and desensitized like how an eyeball would become damaged without an eyelid. This can lead to sexual dysfunction and body image issues. Babies are circumcised without anaesthetic because it's too dangerous for their heart, and at that age the foreskin is stuck to the head of the penis like a fingernail is stuck to a finger. And obviously there are many cases of botched circumcisions, in which the babies then require an operation, this time under anaesthetic, and often they die as a result. Despite having their bodies mutilated and future sexual function and pleasure stolen from them, there's also the emotional and psychological damage of the brutal and disgusting torture of being circumcised without anaesthetic. Not that having anaesthetic would make this procedure any less immoral. There are no medical benefits that outweigh the risks, and even things like AIDS in Africa, circumcision does not prevent.
Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris. And statistically...
You weren't doing it right then.
Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
I can't find the compulsory mutilation of the genitals of children a subject for humour in that way, or flippancy in that way. The full excision, not just the snip or the full mandatory covenant is fantastically painful, leads to trauma, leads to the dulling of the sexual relationship, and can be in itself life-threatening at that moment. We have the records, I can show them to you, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in the United States, boy babies who've died or had life-threatening infections as a result of this disgusting practice. That a person as humane as yourself can sit here and think of that as a fit subject for humor shows what I mean. Religion makes morally normal people say and do disgusting and wicked things, and you've just proved my point for me. Shame on you for saying what you just said. Shame on you for saying it about your own son, my God.
Let's move on.
Yes, let's. What next? Cutting the labia of little girls. At least Judaism doesn't do that.
This is a question.
What if a Muslim was to say to you just now, my little girl cried more at her first haircut than when I cut off her clitoris? What would you think of me if I was to say such a disgusting thing?
Although the Jewish tradition of genital mutilation is unbelievably prevalent in America today, Islam is currently the largest single religious group in which the practice is widespread. The following data from UNICEF shows the percentage of female genital mutilation in each country. Now, if you compare this with data from the Pew Research Center, we can look at the ratio of Muslims to female genital mutilation in those countries. So, of all the countries in the world that allow female genital mutilation, almost all of them have an overwhelming population of Muslims. And in many of these countries, the percentages are strongly correlated, with the only arguable exception being Eritrea and Ethiopia. Although, to be fair, it is debated that the number of Muslims in Eritrea could be more, as the US State Department found the number of Muslims was closer to 50% of the population. But regardless, the overall Muslim correlation is blatant. But with all of this in mind, let's see how Muslim apologist Reza Aslan decides to describe the current state of female genital mutilation.
Talking about how women are circumcision for women, not respecting the rights of women, not respecting the rights of gay people. And what's your reaction? And then we'll talk.
I mean, the argument about the female genital mutilation being an Islamic problem is a perfect example of that. It's not an Islamic problem, it's an African problem.
Well, wait, because he says it's a, hold on a second, Reza, because he says it's a Muslim country problem. He says that in Somalia...
Yeah, but and that's actually empirically, factually incorrect. It's a Central African problem. Eritrea has almost 90% female genital mutilation. It's a Christian country. Ethiopia has 75% female genital mutilation. It's a Christian country. Nowhere else in the Muslim majority states is female genital mutilation an issue.
Wow. So it's just an African problem. But is it only in Africa?
The Indonesians call this female circumcision. The UN and the World Health Organization call it female genital mutilation, or FGM. Aaron's daughter is 5 months old. She says it's been done to clean her. It's compulsory according to Islam. They only pierced her, upwards a bit, Aaron explains. The aim is to reduce sexual pleasure or to completely stop it. Mimin has brought her 2-year-old granddaughter to be what she calls circumcised and explains, if a girl isn't circumcised, there's too much sexual desire. They lust for sex too much.
Well, I suppose ignoring Indonesia and Malaysia, the continent of Africa clearly has the highest rate of FGM. So let's break this down with some facts. Africa has more Christian countries than Muslim countries. And of the 30 Christian countries, 9 appear on this list. That's 30% of Christian majority countries, bearing in mind the actual FGM activity here is fairly low and can mostly be attributed to the Muslims living in those countries. Now, of the 24 Muslim countries in Africa, 19 appear on this list. That's 79% of Muslim countries, and most of them with high FGM activity. So, to ignore the clear correlation between female genital mutilation and a belief in Islam, and instead paint this as a broad African issue, is a disgraceful, pitiful attempt to once again turn the public's attention away from Islam.
There's the justice system in Muslim countries, you don't think, is somehow more primitive or subjugates women more than in other countries?
Did you hear what you just said? You said in Muslim countries. I just told you that Indonesia, women are absolutely 100% equal to men.
He'll cite a country like Indonesia as being the poster child for Muslim moderation, and it is moderate compared to Pakistan or Sudan or Saudi Arabia, but 70% of Indonesians want to live under Sharia law, and when you ask specific questions about what sorts of punishments they want enforced, 40% want adulterers stoned to death. Now, it's true only 16% want apostates stoned to death, but that's the best, more or less the best results you get on that question in the Muslim world.
In Turkey, they have had more female representatives, more female heads of state in Turkey than we have in the United States.
But in Pakistan,
stop saying things like Muslim countries.
You know, you almost have to laugh at the blatant hypocrisy. So, you're not allowed to say Muslim countries.
Stop saying things like Muslim countries.
Yet there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying
it's a Christian country. It's a Christian country. Did you hear what you just said?
See, this is yet another reason our media refuses to acknowledge Islam. Because Muslims are simply not open to criticism in the same way that other religions are.
Let's think about this rationally, right? Which isn't a good point for the Christians, rational thought. Jews! What's all that about? What's with the curly sideburns? Where in the Bible to say, if thou loves me, thou shalt look like a dick? Next religion. Isn't Buddha a fat bastard? That's all I've got on Buddha. One more. Muslims. Can you feel that? Can you fucking feel that? One word, one fucking word. And all your assholes shrunk up and went, oh, make it good, Australia, man. Don't fuck this up.
Even though these same people tell us all religions are the same, they know fine well the danger they would be in if they were ever to offend the followers of Islam.
And we began by talking about the decision of many media outlets, including CNN, to pixelate the images of Muhammad.
Now, I know, as well as you do, that you have not done that in order to avoid sparing the hurt feelings of my fellow guest. You've done it because you're afraid of retaliation and of intimidation. Now, I'd like to ask him and anyone else who agrees with him is watching, is that the relationship they want to have with the free press? Because if we have to use this stupid word offensive, those of us who believe in the Enlightenment and the Constitution and the First Amendment are very much offended by this mad, babyish conduct. But we don't go out and kidnap the nearest Muslim we can find and take him hostage till someone apologizes.
Okay.
We don't violate diplomatic immunity. We don't, which is one of the most precious things in the international community, much more precious than the right of Muslims not to have their feelings hurt.
The day after the Charlie Hebdo attack, the first issue of the satirical newspaper since the attack is now on newsstands. It shows the Prophet Muhammad holding a sign that says, "I am Charlie," and the words, "All is forgiven."
And, you know, my feeling is that, you know, we could show a picture of it if we wanted to, just like we could show a picture of a crucifix and a jar of urine, which people did. But I guess my question is why?
Yeah.
If showing a picture, if showing a cartoon offends well over 1 billion Muslims who are not violent,
right.
But who are just as offended by that as I would be offended of putting, you know, seeing a picture of a crucifix and a jar of urine, why, I guess, do it? Just tell people they can find it online, and we don't want to offend over 1 billion Muslims.
And the cover, we should say, shows the Prophet Muhammad wearing a T-shirt that says, "Je suis Charlie," and Muhammad is crying in this photo, and it also says, "Tu es pardonné," all is forgiven.
To get this published.
Now, we should make clear, because I think we do have to make clear, that obviously, we've been talking about a cover and we're not showing it to you. CNN is not showing the cartoon.
CNN and many other news organizations choosing not to. This is part of a long-standing practice. You know, images of Muhammad, depictions, cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad are highly offensive to some Muslims. They are a taboo within Islam. And so we have seen some websites and some French media go ahead and share this cover, share it rather widely. It's available online. But there are news organizations like CNN that feel not only would it be offensive to the audience, but it could also be a safety risk for staff, for crews that are in the field.
Newspapers have been talking about an attack on freedom, but none of them has chosen to publish the cartoons.
I'm very sad that journalists in UK do not support us, that journalists in UK betray what journalism is about by thinking that people cannot be grown enough to decide if a drawing is offending or not, because you're not even showing it. It's this, which is completely crazy, that in UK you cannot show a simple drawing as that.
So with
Mohammed
here at Sky News, we've chosen not to show that cover, so we would appreciate Caroline not showing that. I do apologise.
This sort of self-censorship is only because the different news organisations that make up the media are genuinely terrified that if they say the wrong thing, their offices will be attacked and their staff slaughtered, one by one. Just like what the followers of the religion of peace did to Charlie Hebdo. In my opinion, the world would be advanced in its fight against violent, radical Islamic terrorists if our media would at the very least acknowledge this fear.
What is going on at the moment worldwide, and particularly in Europe, is an attempt to shut down any and all criticism of Islam, one religion alone. I'll hold up for a moment. Don't worry, it's not a cartoon of Muhammad. You don't have to get scared. This is the Christmas edition of Private Eye, an image which on the front cover lampoons, and quite rightly, quite amusing, not very, the Virgin Mary and Jesus, and has various jokes about where the frankincense should have been bought from and so on. That's perfectly commonplace But you know what? If anyone had gone into private eye's offices yesterday and massacred the staff because of it in the name of Christianity or Jesus, I think that not only would all of the papers today have been a lot more robust, they would have shown, at the very least, shown this image to show what the person was who did the killing was so irate about. The fact is that there is something going on which we have to identify. It is an attempt in our societies to make Islam, and in particular the founder Islam, immune from any criticism. It cannot be allowed to continue.
Our media has failed us. By refusing to state the facts when it comes to Muslims committing violence, and instead they use this event to show how racist they are not. As long as they can appear as non-racist, then they're happy.
Police dogs might have to wear booties when they search Muslim homes to avoid offending Muslims who believe dogs are unclean.
It's somewhat astonishing that in a nation of 60 million people, a couple million Muslims could cause so much concern.
So-called hate speech is illegal in Britain, but it depends on who is doing the hating. When these British citizens protested the Muhammad cartoons at the Danish embassy in London in 2006, they expressed their allegiance to terrorists. They called for beheadings and nuclear attacks. British police arrested no one. Compare that to when a British news program exposed violent rhetoric in local mosques. British police initially decided to charge not the radical imams who were promoting violence and bigotry, but the news program that did the report, for allegedly stirring up racial hatred.
Perhaps the strange obsession with race and people's skin colour, self-censorship, and dishonest reporting on crimes committed by non-whites is in fact fueled by white guilt, and the bleeding hearts liberals need to see who can be the most open-minded and politically correct as possible. Well, I really hope they're enjoying playing their little game of my mind is more open than yours, because at least then some enjoyment will have come from their failure, which is in fact a failure to support the many suffering and oppressed Muslims who do seek a genuine reformation.
The New York Times came out yesterday and said Islam is not to blame. Howard Dean came out and said these people who committed this crime are no more Muslims than I am. And there seems to be, a rush to very much say that the religion has nothing to do with this.
Yeah. That argument of the New York Times and Howard Dean, with all respect, has now become redundant. It is no longer relevant, in fact, that there is a very strong link between what happened yesterday, what happened in Peshawar, Pakistan, what is happening today as we speak in Yemen, in Nigeria, in Iraq and Syria. All of that violence, you can no longer divorce it from the religion of Islam. You can no longer divorce it from the Prophet Muhammad or from the Quran. Once we acknowledge that, then we can start to put together on the battlefield of ideas a way to defeat them. The only way we have a chance of fighting these barbarians is by talking about it, by expressing ourselves. And I do it by peaceful means. I write, I collaborated in a movie, and I still believe the pen is far more powerful than all their guns.
And it's worth it to you, despite the danger that has obviously been posed to your own life.
It is worth to me because I love life more than I love death. They love death. That message is so much stronger than anything they put out there.
The fearful Western liberals are literally slowing down human progress out of a desperate need to appease Muslims, and in doing so, they are preventing the world from having a much needed conversation about Islam. But that conversation will be had eventually, and the longer the media acts like everything is perfect and there is no violent Muslim elephant in the room, the greater the chance that the more extreme, right-wing and violent elements of our society might just rear their ugly heads again to confront the perceived and real problem of the Islamization of the West and the radical Islam that inevitably follows. While the media are desperate to stifle the conversation, I would like to invite you, Muslim or non-Muslim, to begin that conversation now. Let me start by telling you that I am an atheist. This means I do not believe in any of the 2,870 gods that humans are known to have worshipped. I also haven't invented any gods myself, so I truly am a non-believer. I view all spiritual, religious beliefs as magical thinking, and any form of superstition or illogical and unreasonable thoughts can lead to bad things. In the words of Voltaire, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. If you are a religious person watching this video, then I need you to consider the fact that you are a non-believer too when it comes to 2,869 of the gods humans have worshipped. In other words, you are an atheist when it comes to other people's religions. Now, I would be making this video about the blonde-haired, blue-eyed worshippers of Thor if it were they who were committing violence in the way that the followers of Islam are, but because it happens to be Muslims committing violence, this video is incidentally about them. I'd also like to come back to the notion of the peaceful majority Muslims. Firstly, humans are generally good to each other, regardless of their religious beliefs, and usually in spite of their religious beliefs. But if you are only a good or peaceful person because you either want to get into heaven or avoid hell, ask yourself, without your religion, would you become immoral? Would you steal? Would you kill? If the answer is yes, then perhaps you are a bad person who has simply learned to suppress your true feelings. If the answer is no, then your religion has had no bearing on whether or not you are good. To quote Steven Weinberg, religion is an insult to human dignity. With or without it, you will have good people doing good things, and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. And you know what? Even if religion was responsible for the peaceful behaviour of the majority of its adherents, would that make the evil any less relevant? During World War II, only 7% of Germans were Nazis, and look at what they accomplished. The silent, peaceful majority were not at all relevant. To obsess over the good Muslims is no different than someone in London during the nightly bombings saying, but what about the 93% of Germans who aren't bombing us? Through their inaction, the 93% became irrelevant, and one cannot claim to be good by what one does not do. Now, the first important point I want to make is that an ideology is just a system of beliefs. If you say that it's wrong to question someone's beliefs, then I have to ask you, what is it right to question? On a side note, if Muslims had never questioned the proposed majesty of Jesus, do you think there would even be an Islam? But a belief or an opinion must always be challenged, because while some beliefs are considered harmless, such as a belief in Santa Claus, there are in fact many dangerous beliefs which are not harmless. And even if you consider yourself a moderate Jew, Christian, or Muslim, by having this obvious nonsense believed and accepted in society, you are actually preserving the psychological soil upon which extremism can flourish. In Europe, and places that have been founded on European values such as the US and Australia, we value the freedom to express ideas. This is something that our ancestors sacrificed their lives and reputations for. We have long overcome the days of scientists being burned alive for simply stating cosmic facts. The freedom to express your thoughts and beliefs and have yours challenged is something we have achieved as a society.
The First Amendment gives us the right to free speech. Well, let's remember this. It isn't popular speech that must be protected. Popular speech doesn't need protection. It is unpopular speech that you protect.
Over time, good ideas become integral to our way of life because they improve our existence. And bad ideas, over time, die. Given enough time, good ideas will always defeat bad ideas. And sometimes you will be told that what you think is wrong, and that might make you feel sad or angry, also known as offended. But so what? I find someone farting on a bus offensive, but who cares? If someone says or writes or draws something that makes you angry, you need to understand that your emotions are completely irrelevant. What matters are the ideas or beliefs you hold, and if they are correct, they can withstand any criticism. And I suspect those who get offended when their ideas are challenged know in their hearts that what they believe is in fact not true, and the truth hurts their feelings.
Richard Dawkins, I hope you die of rabies. Bitch liquor. Richard Dawkins, your father's sperm was wasted on you, you ugly person. Say hi to your mother. Richard Dawkins, he is a dick and needs to be killed in a plane crash or a flamethrower accident.
Oh, that's awful.
Richard Dawkins, how can you justify the theory of evolution when you are possibly the most revolting, ugly pile of crap creature on Earth? Richard Dawkins, I genuinely hope something bad happens to you, like you get cancer or something. I look forward to observing from my post in heaven the exquisite tortures you will suffer at the hands of the just and loving God, whom you have rejected, you fuckety fucker. God bless.
È vero che non si può reagire violentamente, ma se il dottor Gasparri, grande amico, mi dice una parolaccia contro la mia mamma, ma gli aspetta un pugno. Ma è normale. È normale. Non si può provocare, non si può insultare la fede degli altri.
When a Muslim or any person says, you can't say or do that because I will feel angry, and I feel I need to commit violence because of that anger, it makes me want to ask them, what else do you find offensive? I mean, am I to refer to these people at all times whenever I want to express a thought, just in case they might find my opinion on what video game is best offensive? But that's what our media is doing. By cowering to people who claim to be offended, our media is creating a new standard by which they must always obey the people who are claiming to be offended. But what if radical Muslims were offended by piano music? Would our news outlets decide to never again play piano music on any of their shows? This is why the very idea of offending people is a joke, and it has to be thrown in the bin.
They have adults going, I was offended, and I have rights. Well, so what? Be offended. Nothing happens. You're an adult. Grow up. Deal with it. I was offended. I don't care. Nothing happens when you're offended. There's nothing. I went to the comedy show, and the comedian said something about the Lord, and I was offended. And when I woke up in the morning, I had leprosy. Nothing happens. I want to live in democracy, but I never want to be offended again. Well, you're an idiot.
If someone tells me that I've hurt their feelings, I say, well, I'm still waiting to hear what your point is.
Right.
I'm very depressed how in this country you can be told, that's offensive, as if those two words constitute an argument or a comment. Not to me, they don't. And I'm not running for anything, so I don't have to pretend to like people when I don't.
Right. Now, Muslims will often talk about things being an insult. Yet they know non-Muslims don't believe what Muhammad said to be true. To non-Muslims, Muhammad either has to be a guy who just made up a story, or Muhammad is a person who was himself made up. Either way, what could be more insulting to those who dedicate their lives to defending the Prophet Muhammad? Perhaps it's not so hard to understand why they even have words like infidel and kafir. Now, when we talk about Islam, it's important to understand that the words Allah, Islam, and Muslim are Arabic words. Allah simply means God, Islam means submission to God, and Muslim means someone who is submissive to God. Even Sharia law just means the rules of God as stated in the Quran. So the only thing that we really need to question or challenge is the rules stated in the Quran and the moral behaviour it calls for. Interestingly, if you happen to have believed in God before Muhammad's revelation, Muslims would consider you a Muslim too, because of your belief in God. So theoretically, the Jews who followed the rules of the Old Testament in the year 1800 to 400 BC are now considered Muslim, or at least they should be, considering they followed the only piece of Abrahamic religion that existed at that time. See, the Quran is considered to be the last part in a trilogy. To them, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the last and final testament, aka the Quran, are all the same thing. This is why Jesus is mentioned more in the Quran than Muhammad is, because Jesus is a prophet in Islam too. Funny how Muslims aren't protesting Charlie Hebdo for depicting Jesus, or any of our Western depictions of him. Maybe they aren't aware that, by their own logic, they should. Judaism and Christianity are just as much Middle Eastern religions as Islam is. They all come from the same part of the world. So why are Judaism, the first half of the Bible, and Christianity, the first and second half of the Bible, so peaceful? Well, the truth is, they're not. They too call for many abhorrent behaviours.
No homos will ever be allowed on this church as long as I'm the pastor here. Never!
Now, for the most part, we Westerners have learned to ignore these bad bits. But Muslims aren't at that stage yet. The religion of Islam is largely behind in time. But this will be fixed. Islam cannot survive exposure to Western ideas. They can't survive the slightest ounce of untethered skepticism. This is why it is ultimately a good thing that Muslims have brought Islam to the West. See, Islam has come to the West to die.
Islam is a religion that has the least confidence in itself, and that's why any little criticism rocks them. I mean, it goes crazy, because they cannot answer you logically. They cannot defend themselves logically, so they resort to terror and violence.
The Quran itself says, "O you who believe, do not ask about things which if made plain to you will make you uncomfortable." And so even among Muslims, they say, and they quote the Quran, don't ask too many questions.
Don't ask any questions. Believe in it as it is. And that's why when Muslims live in the Middle East, nobody criticizes Islam because it's a crime. But we come to America here, and suddenly Americans are asking us questions, very innocent questions, and we're just like, oh my God, how dare they ask us this question? We've never been asked this question in the Muslim world.
You must hate Islam.
You must be hating Islam. You're supposed to accept what we tell you as is.
The belief in science has relative strength. It's not the strength that it's fluctuating. Look at the Quran. Why do we believe in the Quran? Look at what the Quran says in chapter 21, verse number 30. Do the disbelievers not see that the earth and sky was once one, and we opened it? And we made everything living out of water. That's a biological fact today, which is a recent discovery, that all life originates as a precursor is water. That you see even those space probes that are going into Mars are probing for the existence of water. Who could say that 1400 years ago? That's the evidence.
Actually, someone did say that 2,500 years ago. His name was Thales. He argued that all life originated from water. This belief was a cosmological view in ancient Greece. It wasn't commonly held, but it was certainly advocated.
When we look at the descriptions of embryology in the Quran, and we look at the descriptions of embryology in Aristotle,
sure,
they're the same.
Well, in what way, sir? Would you like to give us
the discussion of the development of bones, etc., all these things, the fairly crude stages that are described in Aristotle.
Does Aristotle say the bones come first and then the flesh and the muscles? Does he say that? Are you sure?
Anybody that works.
I'll let you think about this.
Well, is that what the
I'm not saying it. Can you are you sure?
Is that what the Quran specifically says?
Absolutely. This is exactly what the Quran says. Chapter 23.
Because you just demonstrated the Quran is wrong.
Yeah, but how?
That's not what happens in the book.
This is what the embryologists are telling us. This is
no,
exactly what the
not.
embryologists are telling us.
No, they're not.
Okay. Let me tell you what Keith Moore said. I mean, you can disagree with him. What he said on the page number 364A of his book, The Human Embryo, that in the 7th week the bones are formed, and immediately after that the flesh is formed, and the flesh, the bones are clothed with flesh. Well, Keith Moore is wrong. He's an embryologist. This is his field.
It's my field too. I know he's wrong.
You're an embryologist?
Yes.
Oh, great! Wow, wow, that's news to me. Okay.
So that's wrong, because what happens first is you have differentiation of mesoderm.
Right.
That within the mesoderm you have segregation into things like embryonic mesenchyme, and then you have these cartilaginous centers that will form bone.
Right.
And these are forming simultaneously with each other.
Right. Simultaneously.
Yes.
Even if that's the case, the Quran is right. Because thumma is very, even if that's the case, linguistically, the Quran is right. Thumma literally can, in Arabic language, means things happening simultaneously. Yes.
Well.
Yes.
But that's besides the point.
If you actually look at the moralities that are accepted among modern people, among 21st century people, we don't believe in slavery anymore. We believe in equality of women. We believe in being gentle, we believe in being kind to animals. These are all things which are entirely recent. They have very little basis in biblical or Quranic scripture. They are things that have developed over historical time through a consensus of reasoning, sober discussion, argument, legal theory, political and moral philosophy. These do not come from religion, to the extent that you can find the good bits in religious scriptures. You have to cherry pick.
Sooner or later, it will be infected with the antidote of logic and reason from free and honest discussion, and this anti-venom will spread to the Middle East. This is how it will play out in the years ahead. Plus, when you throw in the fact that young people in the Middle East are only a YouTube video away from understanding why the doubt they dare not admit they have is well founded, then it becomes easy to see that Islam has no real future. Anyway, let's take a look at the overall development of Islam. Over 3,800 years ago, someone somewhere started to write a book. Every few decades or so over the following 1400 years, people unknown to us would add to this book. This book is known as the Old Testament. Then, after a 400-year break, the prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, was supposedly born and died at the age of 33. And within 100 years of his death, the New Testament was written, again, by people we don't know. So here we have two books, the authors of which we have every reason to think were simply making it all up, and this existed for 600 years until Muhammad came along. I'd also like to point out that the Bible is something Muslims think is corrupted, edited, and altered by humans, yet they still draw beliefs from it. But if you believe the Bible to be partially compromised, then how can you believe one word it says? Well, they usually pick and choose which parts to believe, as is the case with the angel Gabriel. One day, in the year 610 AD, a 40-year-old man called Muhammad walked into a cave and saw the angel Gabriel. Muhammad must have recognized him from the Bible, I imagine, though Muhammad couldn't read or write, and also didn't believe the Bible was true, but nonetheless, the angel Gabriel was there. Over the next 22 years, God would talk to Muhammad. Again, this was the God of the Bible, which Muslims believe to be a forgery. Muhammad then died in the year 632 AD. He never learned to read or write, and thus had not written down the things God had told him, which kind of makes you think that Muhammad had no desire for his words to live on beyond his own lifetime. Otherwise he would have learned to read and write, and made sure to preserve the word of God. Instead, the authorship of the Quran was left to his predecessors, who themselves had to remember what Muhammad had said was God's word. But let's say you honestly believe that Muhammad talked to God directly. Let's say you actually believe he flew to heaven on a big horse with wings in order to negotiate with God, who initially demanded 50 prayers a day, but later settled on just 5 prayers a day. Let's say you believe those things. You still have to ask yourself, who wrote the Quran, and can you trust that they didn't change a thing? See, a religious book is a history book to those who claim it to be true. To them it is the evidence. But belief requires you think it's true without evidence. That's what faith is. If you think a book is evidence, then the only faith you have is that it has arrived to you in an unedited, uncompromised form. And this is the hypocrisy at the core of all holy books. Over the 2 decades following Muhammad's death, people who knew him wrote down things they remembered him saying, along with gathering things his followers had written during his life. I'd like to point out here that these people, whoever they were, weren't prophets, nor God. Yet all Muslims have complete faith in them, and it only makes sense if you don't think about it. But during these years, the Quran was compiled. There were many different versions, and when the people settled on a version they all agreed on, they, believe it or not, burned all the other copies. But 140 years after Muhammad's death, his biography was finally written. See, in Islam, there are 2 rule books, the Quran and the Hadith, also known as the Sunnah. The Hadith was written by humans, and it describes the actions, likes and dislikes of Muhammad. Now the Quran calls for murder and violence towards homosexuality and people leaving Islam. However, blasphemy for drawing things is not mentioned. Only in the Hadith does it state, you cannot depict an animal or human that has a soul. And the reason Muslims may not depict a living thing with a soul, whatever the fuck a soul is because it is forbidden to create an idol that could be worshipped instead of Allah. This includes Muhammad. In Islam, false worship is called shirk and is known as the unforgivable sin. But remember, the Hadith is 100% not the word of God. Any devout Muslim knows this, yet you will find Muslims obeying its rules as if it were equal to the Quran. But it seems to me that following the Hadith like it is the Quran is in essence worshipping Muhammad and should be considered blasphemy.
He used to tell people that the urine of the camel and his own urine would cure diseases. Muhammad's urine, okay, that's in some hadith. And today in Egypt, because they're becoming so Islamist, there is a clinic that opened to sell camel urine because Muhammad said so.
Personally, I find it very hard to understand how Muslims square the many circles they have in their religion. Perhaps they can't, and thus we have the many problems and silliness we do, such as Muslims not being allowed to make snowmen as it creates a false idol they might worship.
A prominent imam in Saudi Arabia has announced or made a pronouncement that the building of snowmen is un-Islamic and is in fact issued a fatwa, which is not necessarily a death sentence, but a religious legal pronouncement against the building of snowmen.
It just sounds so ridiculous, doesn't it? But imagine you are alive in the world 2,000 years ago. Life expectancy was low, infant mortality rate was high, life was perilous, and fear of death would consume every living minute. You have no understanding of disease or medicine, so along comes religion, with the promise of eternal life after you die. But eternal life isn't just a reward. It's a relief. It means you will be free of the pain and suffering. Now, that's an offer you can't refuse. All of your fears of dying go away, and all of your suffering begins to feel as though you're working towards something. All of the pain you feel will someday be repaid in an afterlife, and as long as you just follow the random rules of the Bible or the Quran, you will gain access to heaven and live on forever. Now, who wouldn't fall for that? You'll hear some Muslims claim that they love death more than the infidel loves life, and I believe them. But what's interesting is that all of the rewards and pleasures they look forward to in a paradise are things you can already achieve in this life. So maybe what they really look forward to is being free from the never-ending drudgery, oppression and demands of Islam. To some of these people, death is a welcoming escape. But it's the 21st century now. The future is big and bright. By the end of this century, we really could be looking at the possibility of eternal life. Scientific advancement will lead us to the sort of technology that will turn aging into just another medical condition that can be cured. Then of course, we have to look at our place in the universe. Our home planet on which we evolved is one asteroid strike away from being uninhabitable. So we are already looking at how to make a home elsewhere on other planets.
Eventually, you see large-scale, actual human migration there. Tell us how you envision that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing we should be aiming for long term, is to create a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. I mean, that's the thing that will ensure that in the event of a calamity on Earth, civilization continues, light of consciousness is not extinguished. That seems like good. Those seem like good things to me.
With this in mind, it makes it so much more hilarious when we hear Muslims say they wish to take over the world.
They are an angry minority. Their goal, nothing short of Muslim domination of the United Kingdom, if not the world.
Massive immigration has made Malmö today 1/4 Muslim and stands to transform it into a Muslim-majority city within just a few decades. One of the most popular baby names is not Sven, but Mohammed. And while some Christians and Jews live in fear for their physical safety because of Muslim violence, in Denmark you'd better not insult Islam or you could be charged for hate speech.
Islam will come. Islam will dominate. Islam will dominate the east of the east and the west of the west.
The graffiti says it all. Welcome to Belgistan. Muslims are still a minority in Belgium, but in the capital of Brussels they're already the largest religious group, 1/4 of the city's population, and are expected to be the majority in less than 20 years. This is not Saudi Arabia, it's Spain. But Spain is undergoing a transformation. Muslims who once ruled most of Spain are returning.
Enemy of freedom.
We can talk over each other. We can talk over each other.
And I don't
or
want
you
your
give yourself an
Sharia
interview
law,
if you want to.
and neither does anybody in Great Britain
Well,
that has a
you
brain.
will have no choice, in fact, Sean. It's coming to a place near you. It's coming to a place near you.
So you're threatening to come and get me, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that the Sharia will be implemented in the whole world one day.
Sharia is,
the
so
promise
you,
of the
that's what
Messenger,
you want.
Muhammad
You want that. Thank you. You've answered my question. You want a worldwide Islamic
Of course we do.
caliphate.
Of course we do.
But what happens when all non-Muslims one day say, okay, we're leaving now, we're going to live on Mars. Bye Muslims, the world is yours, enjoy it. Can't you just imagine all the Muslims on Earth hating non-Muslims on Mars and wanting to take over that planet too? It shows you how ridiculous it all is. But I'd like to end this video now without any sort of sentimental, uplifting, harmonious conclusion, because the only relevant solution to the problem of Islam is the one I began this video with. We need to talk about Islam.